Well, I agree partially, but not completely. If you look what the Europeans did at the NATO meeting, it wasn't just with regard to Turkey's admission as an EU member. They rebuffed the president with regard to permanent combat troops in Afghanistan. They basically said, we don't see the great titanic battle with al-Qaeda that you see. They largely balked at his idea of putting trillions of dollars more a stimulus package to revitalize a global economy. And those were far more central, I think, to his objectives than Turkey was, and they were quite strong and adamant they were not going along. So I think the ability of the United States at this particular time to have this great influence on what the EU does is an overstatement, and it may be creating some kind of resentment. What's the United States saying the European Union ought to do with Turkey? Does the European Union tell the United States whether NAFTA ought to be expanded beyond Mexico and Canada into South America? And I think there is this growing assertiveness in the EU, in part because the United States' large, at least if not failures, difficulties in Iraq and Afghanistan as to why the United States should take the lead. You know, the United States is begging China to please buy their treasury bonds and other such things. So I think overall, globally, the demonstration showed that the United States probably comparatively is a little bit weaker than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Of course, Turkish-Armenian relations always come to mind. How do you view President Gül's leadership in regards to his recent negotiations involving a host of issues, as President Obama put it, opening borders, establishing ties, improving security for a fuel pipeline to the West?
Well, I think he's been exceptionally deft. I think he's been quite non-disputatious, if you will. You know, the idea of opening the border, the soccer diplomacy, the acceptance of an international commission that would finally adjudicate what characterization should apply to the events of 1915, and this would not be an adjudicatory body that's biased one way or the other. I think that's being exceptionally, if you will, forthcoming. Because remember, this whole issue is not even just about a resolution, because on the Armenian side, they think that a resolution finding that what was done was genocide would lead to reparations, even boundary changes.
I agree with Bruce. There have been negotiations, there have been secret negotiations between the countries for several years now, but it was in 2008, October, when Gül was invited to go to Yerevan to watch the soccer game between Turkey and Armenia. He accepted, and that was the beginning of increasingly high level and often negotiations, not only between Turkey and Armenia, but brought in Azerbaijan as well. So we're hearing in the Turkish press that an agreement is imminent. Perhaps something after April 24th will be announced. So apparently there is some kind of agreement. Turkey and Armenia have decided that it's in their best interest to establish, formally establish diplomatic relations.
What is your view of the recent Turkish national elections? Has there been a shift in the electoral mandate of Turkish voters?
Well, if you look at the outcome of the elections, the ruling party, AK Party, still came in #1 at roughly 38–39% of the vote. It was roughly the same result as the combination of the next two parties. So the problem is that last election, AK Party received 47% of the vote, and the Prime Minister said anything less than 47% he would see as a failure. So I believe the Prime Minister kind of set the bar very high, and it made it seem like he lost the elections, whereas actually, I mean, he won. So it all depends on how you look at it.
Well, whether or not he created expectations that he fell short of, I do think it's a signal that the AKP is not doing everything that's winning the hearts and minds of the Turkish people and the electorate. And that would indicate maybe some change of course with regard to policies, the ones that are very contentious, freedom of speech, freedom of press, the corruption issues that may concentrate the minds of the government more closely than in the past.
Of course, the economy had an impact on the elections. How could it not?
A recent article in the Los Angeles Times noted that President Obama avoided using the term genocide during his visit. Do you think Congress will attempt to pass a resolution through again in the near future?
No, I think that there's basically a loss of momentum that would perhaps hit its high water mark last year when you had at one point well over 200 members of the House of Representatives being co-sponsors of a genocide resolution. This time you've got less than half of that. You've got a more sustained, I think, voice on the other side saying not only is it historically dubious, but it's not a time and place for a legislative body with no historical experts to opine on something almost a century ago. And it's unlikely, and I think, to push forward. It seems clear that the reticence of the president himself in Ankara to mention, or Istanbul to mention a genocide word would suggest he's not out pushing Congress to do anything. And I make this observation as well about his reference to how the United States had looked at its past with regard to slavery, segregation, and treatment of the Native American Indians, and urging that Turkey needs to examine its history and the Ottoman Empire in a similar fashion. But it speaks volumes. I assume that Mr. Obama knows his history. The United States, despite looking backward at slavery, has never characterized it as genocide. It's even opposed any international declaration that reparations should be paid for countries that practice slavery. And with regard to Native American Indians, despite all of the abuses against the Native Americans, there's been no resolution in Congress to characterize that as genocide or otherwise. So if he's using the United States, which he seemed to be, as the model, that would not suggest that he is fervent for a genocide characterization.
I agree with Bruce regarding the momentum. There are currently 93 co-sponsors of HRES 252, which is the number of the resolution this Congress. Last Congress, it was 106, and Resolution 106. Right now, there are 93 co-sponsors. Last time, around this time, there were more than 200, I believe, co-sponsors. 218 is the magic number that you need to pass. So I don't think the Speaker will even consider bringing it to the floor unless it has at least 218 co-sponsors, and there just doesn't seem to be the momentum. Also, there's the issue, would she want to embarrass the president? It just doesn't seem likely at this time.
Finally, a question on Turkey's economy. In terms of the world financial crisis, how will Turkey's lawmakers attempt to combat the slowdown in economic growth?
Well, if we look at the pattern across the world, remember that politicians are moved by politics, not by economics. Economists are moved by economics, but they don't sit in the Grand National Parliament or the ministries. And they're inclined at any time there's an economic downturn to just spend money. Now, I think Turkey confronts a less alarming situation financially than the United States because previous downturns had caused them to be more regulated, and therefore the businesses were unable to be as risky as AIG or Lehman Brothers or otherwise. But it still doesn't mean the temptation, the politician will be, hey, here I am, I want to put out money to my friends. They'll be thankful that they still have a job or their company is still solvent, and therefore they'll vote for me at the next campaign. That's typical. It isn't just with regard to the economy. Oftentimes you see parties giving out welfare, soup, shelter, or whatever just before, even on election day, hoping to win and curry favor with the voters. But remember, what is not known is that each time this expenditure is made on behalf of someone who they can see, it means that untold number of anonymous persons are not going to get jobs in the future because there won't be the capital innovation to create these new business enterprises. But the politicians don't care about the jobs not created. They just see the jobs being lost in front of them, and that's why they squander this kind of money.
Prime Minister Erdogan was criticized for not taking action soon enough regarding the economic crises, and he was reluctant to agree to an IMF plan before the elections. Now that the elections are over, I think they are looking closely at that. There might have even been an agreement, or close to an agreement. So that's where that stands.
Thank you so much, Lydia and Bruce. We look forward to having you back on the program soon. Thank you for joining us for another episode of A New World, Politics, Personality, and Culture with the Turkish American Perspective. This program is brought to you by a generous grant from the Turkish Coalition of America. Until next time, all the best from Washington, D.C.